Well, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Babs and Bob Strickland for this lovely, lovely facility. Jay and I have been coming. Jay and I have been coming the last few years for the programs here once a month, and I'm so admiring of the building. And I thought, gosh, being environmental educator for the Wildlife Commission, I thought, man, I would have loved to have had this facility to have done my workshops with teachers and so forth. And it's just so lovely. And I think it's such a great way to honor your daughter, Anne Elizabeth, whose picture, every time I come here, I look at it and admire it and think, wow, what a neat way to memorialize her with this facility. So anyway, thank you about that. Okay, well, I am here to talk to you today about the reintroduction of the Peregrine Falcon. I have been, let me get my, apparently this goes off. I've been involved for 25 years of working at Chimney Rock Park, observing the falcons there. And now that I'm retired from the Wildlife Commission, I'm volunteering under our biologist who works with the falcons, Chris Kelly, a young, it's so nice to see all these young biologists coming, especially women biologists, which is neat. Okay, so the Peregrine program actually got started in 1983, and I want to digress for just a few minutes because it's difficult for people to understand all the differences in funding and so forth with wildlife, because we have non-game program, we got the game program and so forth. So I just want to digress just a moment and give like a little historical so you can understand things. Back when the settlers first came to the United States, we thought, you know, just imagine these forests everywhere. And that they were expansive and that it just went and went and went and went. Anyway, so we thought, resources forever. And so we started settling, and we had like this philosophy of manifest destiny that you've probably heard about. And it amazes me when I go to European countries and see the land there and compare it to the United States. And it took several thousand years for the landscape in European countries. And think about our country. You know, it was only just a few hundred years that we've gotten from a wilderness to what we have now. So just think about, you know, what we did with this manifest destiny. So we continued not thinking, you know, that the resources, we thought that they would last forever. And around the turn, or the end of the 1900s, turn of the 20th century, we started realizing lots of things were beginning to not be in the environment. And about that time is, I'll talk specific to North Carolina, about the time hunters, you know, they weren't finding, we had wiped out the elk in the area. And if you look at a lot of the mountain names, we have like Elk Mountain, elk this, elk that. So the elk was here. It is an extirpated, what we call an extirpated species. It's extinct in this area, but it's not extinct. The species isn't extinct like out west. And so we call those extirpated species that are no longer in a certain area. So the elk, the buffalo, we had a woodland buffalo, and we have buffalo creeks around, you'll hear. And so it became an extirpated species. the wolf, the red wolf, and also the gray wolf that was found here. Some became, another species, beaver, which has come, it's made a remarkable comeback. But they, we have some Lake Adger people in here. Some of them don't like the beaver coming and chewing up their woods. But the beaver, I will just mention, is an excellent species to maintain the hydrology of an area. And so, anyway, he's a good critter. Anyway, the cougar, there's several names for the cougar. Some people know it as the cougar, the catamount, like in Western Carolina University, that's their mascot, the catamount. It's also called the mountain lion, and it's also called the panther. Mountain people say like Painter Gap, where the Elliots live. It's also called the puma, but it's all the same animal. And they were extirpated from this area too, around 1930. I think the last one was in the Smokies. It's the eastern cougar. There's still a western subspecies, and once in a while you'll hear about cougar, and most of our biologists think that it's western cougar that has been released in the area. And so anyway, they're out. And then there's some that became extinct at that time. One is the passenger pigeon. And can you imagine, like billions of passenger pigeons? And the last one died in the Cincinnati Zoo in 1914. Her name was Martha. Some of you have probably seen the program about it. Anyway, another one is the Carolina parakeet. The settlers did not like this bird. This was our only parrot family, and they like to, eat the apples and so forth. And so the early settlers just eradicated them wherever they would find them. And the last known one was in 1920 for it. So I could go on and on and on about all these species. So around, at the turn of the century, there were conservationists such as Teddy Roosevelt. They started setting up like the national parks, the national forest, the wildlife refuges, national wildlife refuges, and so forth. And there was also concern about the millinery business, the hats that the women wore with the plumes. And at the time, plume hunters were like just killing out all these colonial nesting birds, such as the American eagle, great blue herons, and so forth. The first wildlife, or game warden, which they called at that time, was hired by the Audubon Society in the Everglades area, and he was murdered actually, by some plume hunters. So you can see what was going on at that time. So other species, such as deer, were almost wiped out. And so the government, around 1937, gave money to the states, all over the United States, funding to help restore wildlife. And so it was called the Pittman-Robertson Restoration Act. And they got the money from taxes on hunting and licenses and sporting guns and so forth, and ammunition. And then the same problem with our fisheries. They were almost wiped out. Here in western North Carolina, when we started logging, it made the streams have siltation in them, and also the warming of the water. And our brook trout, which was a native species, it was dying out because they need very, very cool water. And so around 1950, they did the same thing. It was federal money, a restoration for fisheries around 1950. And again, that was a taxation on angling supplies and so forth, fishing rods and so forth. And so that helped bring back some of the fisheries in this area, because our streams are, most of them, even though they're trout, we call them trout streams, a lot of them are very, very warm, and the waters, and they cannot support our native trout, the brook trout. There are some streams that can support them, but that's why we have to stock, and we're stocking rainbow trout, which is found out from out west originally, and the brown trout, which comes from Europe. So those are some of our trouts that we stock. So anyway, this is kind of what happened. And so for a long, long time, and this is, a lot of you are from other states, and what I'm telling you about North Carolina is also kind of the general thing that happened in other states. Most states, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and it's usually they have a wildlife in their states, and they get money from hunting and fishing licenses. And so it's the hunters and fishermen that have supported bringing back what we call game species. And these are, because they're financing it, the money is mainly going to the things that they like to hunt, deer, or animals that they like to trap, like beaver, the river otter. The river otter was extirpated from western North Carolina, and back in the 80s we brought it back. And again, you know, it's for trapping and so forth. And so the funds are mainly, everything's been supported by hunters and fishermen. Non-game, animals that aren't hunted or fished, if our management benefited them, so be it. But the monies weren't for them. And so the hunters and fishermen have kind of been supporting things for a long, long time in the United States. So now I'll get back to this. So around 1983, and this is true in a lot of states, they started a program for non-game. And in most states, they did it through a checkoff on the income tax to finance it. Because, you know, hunters and fishermen, they may not necessarily, you know, want to support a peregrine falcon or whatever. So does everybody understand kind of the gist of this here? Okay. So,
I have a question.
Yes.
Some of the animals that you that tried that are no longer here, can they be brought back and protected?
Yes. An example, well, a couple of examples. One, the red wolf. There were only, around the early 70s, there were like 100 of them left. And so, well, actually, there was only like 20 of them that they felt that were genetically the real thing. And they took them up out of swamps in Louisiana area. And they took them to Tacoma, Washington, and they had them in a zoo up there for quite some time, and they bred them. And anyway, finally, when they had about 100 or so, they first tried reintroducing them to Bowles Island down in South Carolina, and there was a hurricane that came through, and so that didn't work out. And then they reintroduced them to the Alligator National Wildlife Refuge on the coast of North Carolina, and they've done quite well there. They also tried doing it in the Smokies, and it failed in the Smokies because they didn't have enough prey base there to feed their young. So another example is the elk that you probably know about that they have brought back. And all that is experimental. It's not a true reintroduction. They did this in the late 90s just to see how they would do. Because elk are very migratory, and so if they could really work out, now that the eastern part of the United States is very highly populated, think of they were placed in the Caloochee Valley, which is right next to I-3. So they've had problems, with them getting hit by cars and so forth. And they infiltrate down into Cherokee and different places. So it's kind of an experimental kind of thing. And so the cougar its population is increasing in western states. And I predict, because of our high deer population now, we were very successful with our deer. In the early 80s, we were still stalking deer. I remember some of the biologists working at night. We would shoot out, we would bait the deer and shoot these canonets and take them to other places. So we did a great job. The problem is, only hunters are their natural predator right now, so they don't really have one. So usually things will make their way once the resource is there, and there have been sightings of some western cougars, mainly males, that have kind of gone from there's one that I know about that was in Michigan for a while, and then they were spotted in Maine, but they were killed by a car. So it's a possibility that they may eventually come. Also, now that they have brought the Everglades back, the Florida cougar, which is a subspecies of the eastern cougar, may start moving northward. Yes?
I live in Fayetteville, and I used to live an hour directly east of Fayetteville, and my best friend, and then I've talked to probably at least 12 people in this area, and they're seeing these large black cats with very long tails.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody I talked to in conservation at the park back near Pinehurst, now I don't believe it, no, because there's too many people that see them
Right.
all over from here, even east. They're saying that they might be, what do you call it, was it colors flat in Wisconsin? Nobody's gotten that close to see that.
Right.
When I spoke to. What would you say that?
Okay, I'm going to grab something to help explain this.
Also talking to fishermen, the average fisherman in this area, late 70s, early 80s, they saw
Right.
a very large cat, maybe 150 pounds.
Yeah.
And a very long tail, this is way back in the woods somewhere around here. So they've been seen for a long time, but what would you
Okay, what the consensus is about it is that the eastern cougar, we feel, which was a subspecies, is extinct. However, we haven't verified that. But in order to verify it, we would need hair from it, and we haven't been able to get any. And over the years, there has been sightings, and a lot of people say exactly what you know, like a black one or whatever. Some have seen others. And so it's kind of what I said about people bringing them in. And one thing, my former husband, who was a wildlife officer, gave this to me. First of all, I'm going to pick on you, Susie.
Oh, I love it. I don't know anything.
What is this?
An alligator clip.
And what is it used for?
I think it's to use for transferring electricity or wires or something.
Right, you're right. But also, what do a lot of people use?
Torture.
No. Joints. It's a roach clip. It's for marijuana smoking.
Oh, yes, you get the last.
Yes. Okay. So I'm pointing this out. Okay. And on this side, my dog chewed this up. This is a hawk's talon. So my former husband confiscated this from somebody. So it's illegal on both sides, here and here. Okay, and I have always used this in my workshops a long time ago for people to understand illegal wildlife trade and illegal drug trade or whatever go hand in hand. If you ever noticed on television sometimes when they're raiding those big haciendas with the drug dealers, you'll see all this exotic wildlife. And so a lot of illegal wildlife trade happens like this. A number of years ago in Rutherford County, some people came home. They had been away from their home on vacation for a few days, and they came home. They opened the back door to let their cats in. And this strange animal walked in, and it was a baby cougar. It was about 3 months old, and they just could not understand this, you know. So they called the dog warden, and he came, and all the biologists who heard about it, it was kind of like on a Friday, and they weren't working, so they weren't going to deal with it, and of course they didn't believe it, you know, that it was a baby cougar. Anyway, so the dog warden kept it in the back of his car, his truck over the weekend. And the following Monday, I went with my former husband to see it, and the biologist who worked the area, who's always getting calls, you know, about people spotting cougars, and, you know, he felt definite, you know, it doesn't exist. Anyway, I wish you could have seen his face when he got out of his car and was walking over and saw that baby cougar. But the theory was my former husband was aware of the area where this cougar was, and it was in an area where there was a lot of drug dealers. So a lot of illegal kind of things go hand in hand, and when people get tired of exotic animals, they let them go. Just like you were talking about your ring-billed, ring-necked pheasant. She saw a ring-necked pheasant, and so down in where she lives in the lower part of the county.
My friend was sitting on the side of the road. She likes to look out there and watch clocks. You know, over our east of Fayetteville, there's a lot of. And she said it was like the very end of the day. The cat came out, his feet were wet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they've been spotted all over.
Yeah. Right.
So I wonder if or eastern North Carolina.
They like deer.
Yeah. The prey's there.
I wonder, like, they only hang out with themselves, they don't pack and stuff.
Yeah, I think they probably got some help, and maybe some of them are reproducing. And the black ones are more from Central America instead of, you know, what was.
Could have been brought up.
Yeah, and then some of them may be reproducing because, as you know, cats like to reproduce, even big cats. Anyway, okay, so let's get to the peregrine. Okay, this is a peregrine falcon, and I have an immature, and those of you, how many of you may be going with us to Chimney Rock Park today? Oh, great, got a few. There you'll be able to see an adult We used to have an adult mount, and I don't know what happened to it, but this is an immature. So, and what's pictured here is an adult. One of the neatest field marks, I like to say they're like Elvis Presley. They have those sideburns. And so the adult is this beautiful gray-blue color in the back, and his head is more black. They have a yellow eye ring, and the cere, which is a waxy kind of area around the base of their beak, is yellow, and then their legs are yellow. The male, instead of being yellow, there's coloring in those same areas is more of a orange yellow, and if you're close enough, you can see it. The juvenile, which I'll pass around, is brown and cream. And also, if you'll notice, horizontal banding, and the immature has vertical banding. Okay, we like to say that the peregrine, to give you an idea of the size, because a lot of people think it's a really, really big bird, it's about the size of a crow. And so the wings span is about 44 inches, and in the length from the tail to the beak averages 16 to 20. And weight-wise is 1.5 to 2 pounds is the average. The males are a third smaller, or you can say that the females are a third larger than the males. And so the male is called the tercel. You've probably heard that with the falcon cars. You know, remember the tercel, which was like the male falcon. So tercel comes from like 1/3, and the female is called the falcon. And the reason for this, we'll be talking more about it, we call this reversed sexual size dimorphism. And you see this in all predators, all raptor species. And I'll go ahead and just mention what we think the theory is about this, is that when they're providing for their young, both the male and the female at one point are both hunting, and if the female's larger, she can hunt bigger prey, and also the female has to incubate for a long time. I'll be getting to that in a moment. And so they think that's the reason that they're much bigger. Anyway, I'll pass this around so you can see. Oh, I'll mention that the immature is all the places where the adult is yellow, the immature is blue. So I'll pass that around. Yes?
Just a quick question. So, 4-inch wingspan for wolf falcon?
I know the raven is like 56 inches. The crow, I can.
I assume it's smaller.
Yeah. Well, it's about the same size.
Oh, it is? Okay.
I'll have my husband to look it up for you. Don't mess up my my marker.
I guess the question is why does it go fast?
Oh, we're going to get to that in just a minute. Yes.
Smaller, Jay. Thank you, Chief.
One thing, while it's being passed around, and we'll get to that in a moment, but I want you to notice it because you have to be up close to see it. One thing that the family of falcons, and all falcons have this, they have like, it's a little tooth in that you can see at the base or at the tip is like a little tooth in their beak. And we'll be talking about that in a moment, but they use it to kill their prey. And other birds of prey don't have that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, the Peregrine Falcon gets its...
Span is 33 to 39 inches, according
Yeah.
to Wikipedia.
Oh, he looked it up. Anyway, it's close to it. Look for it in the bird book. I don't trust Wikipedia. Anyway.
Actually, its throws are similar to the Peregrine Falcon.
Oh, really?
Don't mix us up now, Jay. We're learning.
Okay, getting to the natural history of the falcon, notice that its scientific name comes peregrine, that we call it, the common name, comes from the Latin that means wanderer. And they are found all over the world. The only places that they're not found are extreme polar areas and really high mountains like the Himalayas. And in some tropical forests, they're not found. And also, New Zealand is the only country where they're not found. So they're everywhere. The only problem is they have very, very low numbers. And also, they can migrate long distances. In the Arctic area of North America, there's a subspecies, the Arcticus, and they migrate in the wintertime all the way down to South America. So they are everywhere. Okay, now to the flight and the hunting. As I mentioned, the falcon family, which now my time to show you the falcons. The falcon family, a lot of them have the sideburns, not just the peregrine, the little kestrel, which is our smallest falcon in this area. They have the sideburns, and some of the others. They all have that little hook on their beak. And the reason they mainly eat birds, falcons do. So they have to have great speeds in order to catch birds. And so when they go into a dive, most of them, especially the peregrine, they fold up their talons and they mainly hit the birds that they're preying upon. And then they go back up under them and grab them. And then that little hooked tooth part on their beak is used to break the spinal cord. And other birds of prey, they capture their prey with their talons, and then they take them and kill them. But they're mainly killing them with their powerful talons. So that's the difference between falcons. And I have this to the falcon area page so you can see the different falcons. They go from the little kestrel up to a really large falcon that's found in Arctic areas called the gyre falcon, or gyre falcon. You would think that it was pronounced gyre when you look at it, but it's gyre falcon.
You say that the peregrine falcon kills its prey by hitting it, and other falcons or other raptors use
Other
their
raptors,
talons.
yes.
How do they kill it? By hitting it with their heads?
Yeah, with their talons. Okay, I'm going to get into the dive. Okay, what they'll be doing, I've seen them do this a lot up at Chimney Rock. You can go up to the top, drive all the way up to the top at Chimney Rock, and if you stand there, you'll probably be able to see a falcon come by. And sometimes you can see it hunt. Okay, but normally they're flying around, and they're usually flying around 35 miles per hour, just a normal flight. And then they'll go real high, and all of a sudden they might spot a bird that's flying. So they immediately go into what's called a stoop, and they fold their wings back, their tail, everything, and they put their talons up like this, and they go into this incredible dive. The other day I was up at the top of Chimney Rock with a friend, and we were both watching this peregrine falcon through our binoculars, and all of a sudden it got into the stoop formation, and I was watching it in my binoculars, and within a second it disappeared. I mean, my friend and I, it's just so incredible, because most birds of prey that you're watching, like a red-tailed hawk or whatever, and you see it, maybe go into a dive, to go down to capture prey. You can follow it with your binoculars. Not a peregrine. It's amazing. You lose sight of it. So to answer your question that you were asking me prior, to talk about their flight. In the past, most people knew that the falcons, when they go into this dive, it was like 150 miles to 200 miles per hour. And they're the fastest animal on Earth. I have this old poster, but it shows you the comparative speeds of animals, and the falcons. Look at man. Anyway. At least he's half of a snake. Anyway, this is an old chart that I used to have when I taught high school biology. Anyway, so I'll pass that around. So, to answer your question, and Bob is our aeronautical engineer, and he understands flight much better than I do. But they, according to flight physics, the perfect falcon, this is the latest thing, the perfect falcon, if you look at, what their ability could be, not that they normally do this at all, is that at a low altitude dive, like what you would see at maybe Chimney Rock or lower, they can go up to 250 miles per hour. That's their possibilities, okay? And in a high altitude dive, they can go up to 390 miles per hour. What has been clocked, some of you may have watched the National Geographic program on them a few years ago, and there was a skydiver who was working with one, and he, right now, I think this is the highest flight that we actually have. It's 242 miles per hour. So you can safely say 150 to 200, but they can go over, and according to the flight physics, their possibility. And the reason is that they are just very aerodynamic. In fact, falcon, the word falcon comes from the Latin that means sickle, and the shape of their wing is like a sickle, and they're angled and pointed, so they're excellent for aerodynamics with that. So did you understand how they, what they do? Also something that they do in the dive when they turn upside down. When they, in other words, they knock the heck out of their prey, okay? No, not with their beak at that time. What they do, they when they go into the dive, and then when they get right up to the bird, they hit it. They mainly try to hit it with like their wing, because it keeps the peregrine killing itself, you know, by hitting something heavier. So they kind of knock the wing, and their talons curved up like this. And then they back up under it, grab it with the talons, and then they take this hooked beak and they sever the spinal cord of their prey. Your dog does it. Yeah, it's kind of like they're doing kind of like mammalian ways of doing things. But anyway.
How do they stop?
They put the brakes on, Susie.
Turn upside down?
Yeah, they are so maneuverable. It is incredible. They're so maneuverable. Also, if they're chasing something, say the bird, when they went into a dive, they didn't hit it, they can chase it up to 70 miles per hour going, straight and not in a dive. And they can maneuver really easily with their tail. Yes?
If they're not in a dive position, but just kind of cruising around looking for prey, what is the speed?
About 35 miles per hour. Yeah. One time.
They still moving when they hit it.
When they hit it? Yes.
What's the force of the vehicle? How are they, because their head, what, are they using their speed to?
They're using the speed. Think about it. Remember back in when you had science, what is it, 32 miles per second? Yeah, so just think, the speed and everything. And they can, they mainly, in this area, they're mainly preying upon blue jays, grackles, flickers, crows. They can do lots of bigger birds. At one time, the subspecies, there's about 19 subspecies. The subspecies in the United States is called annatum, and that means Latin for duck. They were called the duck hawk when the settlers first came here, and they were seeing them, hunting the duck hawk. And the little kestrel was called the sparrow hawk. And anyway, they can kill things much bigger than themselves. They've been known to, and they only would do this to defend their young, but they have been known to kill golden eagles, bald eagles. One of the major predators for them, which I'll talk about later, is the great horned owl that will prey upon them. But they can also kill a great horned owl when they're defending their eyrie. So they're very powerful from that speed and the force. Yes?
So is their skull tougher so they can take the impact? And then
Yes, and one thing...
what part do they eat of the other bird? All of it? Or?
They pluck it, and they eat almost all of it. Like the entrails gives them, vitamins and so forth.
But they're not hitting it with their skull, they're hitting it with
With those
But
powerful...
still, it's an impact.
Yeah, it's the impact that's killing their prey.
stunning them,
Right,
and then they finish it off with the spinal cord.
yeah, the sever. One last thing that's real interesting that they have, that falcons have, that's different than the other raptors, is that, and I don't know if you noticed it, it's like a little tubercle on top of their beak in the back, and they think that that is to help deflate, when they go into a dive, to deflate the air pressure so they can continue to breathe. And they have a third eyelid, which most animals have except us. We have remnants of it, and it's called the nictitating membrane, and that would like close over their eye in that steep dive. Yeah. Okay, isn't that neat?
Yes.
Okay. The reproduction, they mate for life. We'll be talking more about that later, so I'm just going to skim. They mate for life unless one of their partners, if they die or whatever. They reproduce at cliffs is their preferred way, even though some of them have become adaptable to cities, and they're up on city ledges. And they prey upon one of the most populated birds in the world. And because last night we watched a program called the British Empire. And like wherever I go in the former British Empire, I see the English sparrow and the rock dove, which they brought in. And so the peregrine, the pigeons are everywhere, all over the world. And so that's what they're hunting there. Okay, longevity, they're a very long-lived bird. They can live like 15 to 20 years in the wild, but normally it's more 6 to 10 years. Okay.
How many little ones at a time?
I will get to that in just 1 minute. Okay, first, here in North Carolina, they are an endangered species still, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But to understand what happened, a lot of you probably, we're all the same age, and we probably remember, those of us who, I didn't grow up in the urban area, my husband did, remember after World War II, and they started spraying everywhere for mosquitoes, and they were spraying mainly DDT, which is an organic chlorine pesticide, and we thought it was wonderful. You know, it killed mosquitoes, and it was great. And after probably in the late 50s, early 60s, we started noticing that lots of birds their populations weren't as high as they used to be, especially birds of prey. And you probably remember Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring. I think it was published in 1962, somewhere along that time. She was highly criticized by the pesticide companies, and she had a really hard time standing up. She was a biologist, and a lot of people don't realize she was a biologist, and because they just kept making her out like some crazy woman, you know, and but she was definitely a biologist. Anyway, so this poster, this is left over from when I used to teach high school biology, to try to explain what happens, what we call biomagnification, and it's the buildup of pesticides in a food chain. First, I'm not going to get into all of the biochemistry of all of this. It's very, very complicated, and they really don't understand a lot of the biochemistry with this, but the easiest way to understand it, remember you learned water-soluble vitamins, like the B vitamins and C, go out of your system every day. They're water-soluble. But fat-soluble vitamins are stored in your body, such as vitamin D and E. So think of DDT, it's very fat-soluble, so it's stored in the body. So Can everybody see this chart? So what happens when they're spraying the pesticides? It gets in the insects and the plants and so forth. And then you have a lot of the insects starting to eat it. And say this one dragonfly here, it only gets a small part of the DDT in its system. But when you go up to the next level, say a robin, let's use robins eating some of these, or I know a bluebird, because they'll eat all these insects. So you have one bluebird, and they are eating like lots of insects. So they're getting multiple levels of this DDT, right? And then when you get to the top of the food chain with birds like peregrines, bald eagles, ospreys, the pelican, which suffered greatly from DDT, they're eating much more, getting much more DDT because they're eating all these birds that have all of this DDT. So does everybody understand? We call this biomagnification of a substance. Let me, this is a question I always ask my students when I taught. Which would have more DDT in their milk? A cow or human breast milk? Human breast milk. See, y'all are so smart. Most people would say the cow, but the cow is lower down on the food chain, so they're not getting as much. And like human breast milk, when all this was happening in the 60s and they were testing, the human breast milk had much higher concentrations of DDT than cow's milk that weren't even allowed to be sold at that time, you know, with that concentration. And even though now that we've banned it and it's declined, still in some human populations like in South America and Africa where it's still being used, it's still a high concentration in breast milk. So, okay.
We thought when the trucks came down our street as a little kid and the frame ran like crazy when you talked to the power, that it was taking care of polio.
Really?
And when the polio vaccine occurred, we noted that they quit doing that. Now, I don't know if there was any relation or not. I'm sure it took care of a lot of.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I guess we have to weigh things.
Right.
Also, women quit breastfeeding.
Yeah, about that same time. And we were using
Formula.
yeah, we were using the formula, and then remember there was a bad formula. And this is the same thing that they did with that formula is the same thing that the pesticides companies do. When it's banned in our country, what do? They sell it to third world countries. So they were selling those formulas to African countries, and they were having the same problems with the formulas. So this happened with the birds, and what it does, actually DDT breaks down into a metabolite of DDT called DDE, and it's actually it that acts kind of like, a lot of these pesticides act like estrogens, and in the bird, estrogen is used to help formulate the calcium around the egg. Anyway, it interferes somehow biochemically with it, and so there's not enough calcium in the egg shell. So when they go to sit on them, they break. So you can see that in the weaker one to the right there. So with this decline, at that time, there were less than 100 pairs left in the United States. The eastern population, there were no peregrine falcons in the eastern United States. So they were listed as endangered in 1970, and DDT was banned in 1972. And the Endangered Species Act was in 1973 when we started nationally looking at things. Okay, so these are the nest sites in western North Carolina. Wait a minute, let me see something. The ones in purple are the historic ones, and the green are active ones, and the blue are inactive, which we'll be talking more about the different ones. Something skipped here, I think. Huh. Oh well. Okay, the way we reintroduced was in a process called hacking. And there was a Peregrine Fund started by the Cornell University, and they took captive-raised peregrines and bred them and so forth, and started out with the young. And then they would take the young when they were about 3 weeks old, and they would bring them in and they would place them in these hacking boxes. I think it's interesting how hacking, the word hacking got it started. A long time ago, when falconers would take young peregrines, and they would take them to these boxes, but they would deliver them in these horse-drawn wagons that they called a hack. And they would take them out to these places. And so that's how the word hacking has come about. And all these strategies that are used in hacking come from how they used to do it. So that's the only reason we've been successful, is because of taking some of all the things that have been learned by over the years, and which goes like 3,000 years. Incredible. So we hacked, and where we take them to different places. When they were about 3 weeks old, we would continue feeding. They were fed quail, and 92 birds were released.
What year?
Okay, this we started like in 1984. I have a chart. These were the hack sites. Yeah, one of my slides, I don't know what happened to it, but it was explained. But anyway, okay, here's some first. This shows you the blue are released young, and
What age do they release them?
okay, they take them when they're about 3 weeks old.
Where they're going to?
Right, to the hack box. And then when they're probably about 40 days old, they open the hack box. But they can still stay there, and they continue feeding them.
Have mature feathers?
Yes, I'll be showing you in a moment the different stages of their growth. But they'll be ready. They get to leave on their own. And while they're still there, they feed them through different perch sites, like their parents would do normally. So they're feeding them for a couple of months until they eventually don't come back anymore. This 1984 was when they were first hacked, and in 1986, and the first successful in the wild was in 1988. And it takes, the females usually mature at 3 years and the males at 4. So you can see how it took several years for them to actually have young.
Do they feed inside that box? The box?
Yes, they're feeding. Oh, how they do it. I brought a book on hacking that you all can look at right here. This was published by them, and what they do, they have like a hole in the box where they put the quail, the dead quail, and they're plucked. And they put them through a chute so they cannot see them. They don't want them imprinting at all to the volunteers that are working. And so they're fed that way. And then when they think they're ready to fledge, they take those bars off, and they can still, be in the box. And so they'll continue feeding them, and then they'll fledge on their own, but they keep putting the quail or chickens, whatever they're feeding them. Ours were fed quail. They'll place them in different perch areas around. Okay, so we were very successful, especially out west. And so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they listed them in 1999. But in North Carolina, because they were extirpated in the eastern United States, and we had such few numbers, they're still listed as an endangered species. Okay, after they were delisted, the main thing now that we're doing is a monitoring plan. And that comes under the role of all the different states. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is kind of in charge, but each state does their own monitoring, and those are usually the state wildlife agencies. So this is nest monitoring.
This is where we're supposed to go this afternoon.
Okay, that White Sides Mountain, and it takes a lot of patience. My husband doesn't. He was saying he was with me the other last year, and I had to keep looking at the eyrie. I couldn't take my eyes off of it because I was going to miss the birds coming in, and you have to know what's going on. And if you turn your head 1 second, you might miss something. And he kept saying, "How can you look in that for 4?" I didn't take my eyes away for 4 hours from a spotting scope. And anyway, it takes a lot of patience.
These are little quails. She'd already bonded to them, so do it mysteriously.
Okay, when we're monitoring, these are 3 population parameters that we are looking at: territory occupancy, nest success, productivity, and also trying to find new territories. So how do we do this? First, you have to identify the birds, and you have to find the nest, and you have to have patience, and you have to have volunteers. Okay, the way to find the birds: first you go to an area that has cliffs, and you look for appropriate overhangs where they might be. And the main thing you're looking for is what we call whitewash, which is their poop, okay? Because they don't poop in their nest. They go to the edge of the cliff and poop. Even the babies do that. And so over a number of years, it looks like that. It's called whitewash. But it doesn't mean that peregrines are necessarily there. It could be other birds that use cliffs, like ravens, which I'll be showing you, or vultures. Okay, then you have to know what a peregrine actually looks like from the air. Kathy's my riding buddy, and sometimes I'll be bird watching while I'm horseback riding, and she's asked me several times, "How can you tell?" And of course, it's years of experience, but also you're looking for shapes and so forth. So which one of these is a peregrine? B, very good. And the others, A is a broad-winged hawk. They belong to the buteo family, with the red-tailed hawks, the shoulder hawks. They're big soaring birds, and they have like broad wings. Where the peregrine is angled, and it goes to a point. C is, and also D, belong to a family called accipiters. They also hunt birds, but look at the difference. They hunt birds within a forest. They need a long tail for maneuverability through a forest chasing a bird. And they have like broad wings to do that, but they have those long tails. C is a Cooper's hawk, and how you can tell it from the smaller sharp-shinned hawk that's D is that its long tail is rounded at the end, sharply squared off. Another bird that you need to know when you're looking at the peregrines and so forth is the common raven, which its wingspread is 56 inches. So it's bigger than the peregrine, bigger than a crow. It has a big wedge-shaped tail, kind of fan-shaped. It also has like a long neck. And also its wings, they spread out at the primaries at the end to like fingers. And they also make a very interesting call, which when Jerry was here the other year doing the bird program, I heard one, so we got to add that to your list here at Walnut Creek. And their call, everybody knows the call of the crow, but with the raven, it's a croaking call. And once you hear it, you'll know it forever. But it's like, I can't do one, but it's very croaking kind of call. Yes, who did that? Very good, very good. Very good. Okay. And they also compete with the peregrines for nest sites. Also, the turkey vulture is flying up high around, and one way to know that peregrines might be defending a nest is if attacking turkey vultures and crows. Also, the black vulture, which used to not be that many around here, but now there are much more. And the turkey vulture flies in a V shape, and they have like a long tail and a red head. The black vulture flies with the wings more straight out. They have a short tail, and if you're close enough, they have more black skin on their head. Okay, also you might hear the the falcons, and we'll see, they make a wailing call when they're calling to their mate or to the young. And if they're disturbed, they make more of a cacking call. And then if they're like close together, sitting together, it's kind of a little chuck kind of call. I think we... Can everybody hear that? Anyway. If you hear that, then you know that they're around. So, okay, is this a peregrine nest? True or false?
Not an overhang, doesn't it?
Yeah, it has an overhang. Yeah, it has poop. The whitewash.
Sticks up there to hold anybody in.
Okay, here's the thing. Peregrines, they don't build a nest. Right. This is an old raven nest, and a peregrine has started using it, but they're not using the sticks. One of our biologists has actually seen the female peregrine taking the sticks off. But ravens build a nest with sticks. Peregrines don't, and they make what's called a scrape. They kind of take their bottom and kind of scrape around and make a indention, and that's how they lay. And you can see, if you're laying eggs, that the shells aren't thick, how easily they can break. Okay, then you have to look around. So you have to use spotting scopes, and you can see the eyrie. And this is at Devil's Courthouse eyrie. And this is using a spotting scope from the parking lot at Devil's Courthouse. And sometimes they nest behind vegetation where you can't see what's happening. But the actual eyrie is the picture on the right there. Am I in your way? Okay, another way to know that they're around is looking for perch sites. Okay, in the far top left, you can see like the eyrie. This is at Grandfather Mountain. And then if you go down, you're seeing it more. And then this is an enlargement. And sometimes they use several eyries over the years that might be close to each other. At Chimney Rock, there's like 3 different eyrie sites that they have used over the years.
But it's only one couple that's doing this at each.
Right. The distance between couples here in Western North Carolina, I can only speak for here. Some of our eyrie sites where 2 different pairs are using is like 3 miles distance from each other. Think about it, they have huge territories, and they go out 15 to 30 miles for prey. Like the one here in Chimney Rock, if you watch, I'm sure that they come over here and hunt some. And you can see the 2 dots of whitewash, so you know something's going on there. Here's another example. This is at White Rock, which is on the North Carolina-Tennessee line up in Madison County. Okay, to answer some of your questions on the nest cycle, they start pair bonding, and this is for North Carolina. This might be different in different states, further north or whatever. But here in North Carolina, they start their pair bonding or courtship, which is very interesting to watch, late January, March. They start egg laying early to mid-March. To answer your question about the number of eggs, it's 1 to 5, but normally 3 to 4 usually. The incubation is 31 to 33 days, and then of course the hatching, and then the brooding is another like 44 days. These birds, and all birds of prey, they're what we call altricial. They're young, aren't like gallinaceous birds like quail and wild turkey that as soon as they hatch out, you know, they can kind of be on their own. These birds have to have lots of care. And so you can see the length of time. And then after they fledge, it could be like a month to like the whole summer of them being fed and taken care of and being trained to fly or hunt. Okay, the courtship patterns, which you have to like watch to kind of know what's going on, is is mutual roosting, cooperative hunting, courtship flights, courtship feeding, which is really, really neat. And you can really see this up at Devil's Courthouse. I was there with a group of teachers once, and we got to see a male come in with prey, and the female came and met him. And the female, I think maybe because she's larger, for her to accept the prey, like she'll go up under the male and they'll exchange with their talent. And they have ledge displays, which you're seeing right here, where they do this bowing and so forth. And then the nest scraping, and then finally copulation. Okay, in order to know what, because we can't see into the eyrie to really know what's going on, because you can't see these fledglings until they start moving about it until 3 weeks or so. So to kind of know, you have to look at their behavior. And here's some field notes where you hear the wailing, and this is my main way of finding that they're finally nesting, is I'll hear the wailing, so I know that one's approaching the eyrie, and then I'll see the male, like maybe bringing sometimes food to the female, and her leaving, and the male going directly in and giving her a break. But it's the female that's mainly doing the incubation. The male only helps out while she can take a little pit stop kind of break.
Zora, one question. When
Yes.
you're packing them, how are they taught to hunt?
It's very instinctual, and it's. I read a friend of mine who works for the Wildlife Commission. When he was a student, he actually helped with the initial hacking, and he gave me all of his notes and everything. It was really amazing. As soon as they start fledging, they start playing with one another, and the parents do that too. And they are doing all this acrobatics. You'll see them just going and playing, and they learn to dive at each other and so forth. And so that's how it's kind of instinctual, but because they
Growing quail, right?
no. Well, with falconers, what's the difference between our hacking and what falconers do? The falconers, in the olden days, what they would do, they would go to an eyrie, climb up into one somehow, and they would take the young, and then they would hack them in these boxes, and they would, kind of train them, and they would let them go, and because they're siblings, they do this instinctual kind of thing that I was just telling you about. But a falconer goes back and recaptures them, and then they take them and start training them like on long leashes and so forth, training them to come back, and which is a long process too. Okay, here's a female brooding, and they really take good care of them. Oh, one thing that they do that's really neat, they cache food different places. Like if they have made quite a few kills and the young can't eat it all, they cache it. And then they go back. It's kind of like going, as parents, going to a fast food, going to McDonald's. Okay, here's the estimating age of chicks. You can see the progression of how they get bigger and bigger and more. Here they are at 1 week. The female, they don't eat it that much when they're real young, and she has to tear off, the food to feed. Here at 2 weeks, they're still not moving about. They kind of prop themselves up with each other. Right. Yeah, they don't regurgitate. They might do it some, but it's mainly plucking it off and feeding them little bits. And as they get older, they can eat more and more. But they do see the feathers. They pluck their prey.
How old are
Yeah, that's another thing with falcons. They have really long feet or talons. Here's week 4. Notice that they're starting to get their flight feathers and starting to get some of the body contour feathers. Here they're spending a lot of time preening. I love this one, The Age of the White Pantaloons.
When can you tell the sex, Zora? How old do they have to be?
When they're young, when they're fledglings, the fledglings are actually bigger than the adults, or can be. And they can start telling, like with the coloring and so forth, and the size. The females are larger even at that point. Oops. So, I was going to show you the statistics from 2014. We have like 14 known sites, and the other year, last year, there were like 12 areas, but some of them didn't have a complete pair. They only had like one there. So we had like 89% nest success and 18 fledglings last year from all of it. And this shows you our data from the time that we started, from like 1984. The offspring is in the dark blue, and the hackbirds. Notice that around 1996 and 98, our number of pairs decreased, and so we hacked some of the population.
Did you know the reason?
Because of the hurricane?
All kinds of reasons, which I'll be elaborating on in just a minute. Let me get to that slide and I'll tell you more about it. But notice that we average about 10 over the years. That's the average. And this is the annual productivity, which is the number of young per pairs. And we averaged last year 2, which was a really great season. And around 1995, it's inflated there because that was when we hacked more birds.
If one of the mates dies, does it stop the whole thing? I mean, if the dad is killed, the mother can't leave the baby and come back.
Right. If something happens to the female, she's shot or who knows, if they're at an age and if the male can provide, he will. And then the following year, there might be another female that might show up in the area, a new mate. But they stay with the same mate unless one of them dies. Okay, to answer your question, here are some things that we don't know about. We don't know if the population's growing. Are there new pairs? Are the falcons returning to the natal area, where they were fledged out? We don't know the mortality factors. And a lot of people think, oh, well, why don't you ban them? And notice this bird is banded, but this is one of the hacked birds. It's easy to ban them when they were hacked. But when they are up on a cliff, you cannot easily get into a cliff. Plus, you would want to ban them when they're almost ready to fledge. And what happens if you try that, they will jump off because of fear, and then they'll die. And the whole purpose is to bring them back. And it's much easier to find out what's happening in Charlotte with the peregrines there, because you can go up a, what do they call them, the window cleaning port, whatever it is. Yeah, the lifts up. Well, like a skyscraper, the window cleaning. You can go up one of those, and you can, yeah, the scaffolding or whatever, and find out.
Where in Charlotte are they?
I don't know. It's some downtown building down there.
Off that white stuff, huh?
Yeah. Okay, these are some of the best places to observe falcons. And these are two guys, immatures. Okay. The way to, as I mentioned earlier, everything with the Wildlife Commission, all the game species are supported by hunters and fishermen with their hunting license. And that's true in most states. But for all these, what we call non-game species, how it's financed is originally from the checkoff on the income tax that you see in North Carolina, and also the license plate and the direct donations, and also some federal grants. And a number of years ago, back in the 90s, we tried to do all over the United States a tax on people who enjoy nature, like myself, and I'm sure all of you, like a tax on binoculars, a tax on hiking boots, or something like this, to try to raise money, because the hunters and fishermen have been footing the bill since the early 1900s. And all of us other people who enjoy nature, you know, we don't really pay out anything. And so they tried doing that back in the 90s, and it was amazing how I, at that time, belonged to the Sierra Club up in Asheville. And it was amazing that a lot of my fellow members of the Sierra Club, who are great nature people, you know, they objected to a tax on their binoculars and all this kind of stuff. So, different federal, each year they have money coming in from different things. Right now it hasn't been funded in several years, from what I understand. But at one point, back in the early, around 2000 or so, they were doing it on offshore drilling subsidies or whatever that they were getting. And so anyway, that's it. So do you have questions before we start caravanning? Yes?
Does a falcon or whatever take a land animal or fish?
Yes, I meant to mention that. They mainly, the main mammal that they would take are, which do you think? Think for just a moment. They like, you know, they're attacking birds. So what flying mammal? Bats. In fact, in the Grand Canyon area, peregrines, it's an easy place for them to be on the cliff in the Grand Canyon and go out after bats. But they will go after other things, but mainly birds. That's what they're designed for, especially with those high speeds. Yes?
You mentioned that these birds are thousands of years old. I can remember seeing movies about medieval times where they have these falcons on their arms. I assume these are the kinds that they had, but I don't know for sure. I've also seen that same sort of thing in Asian fighting forces. Question, where is the country of origin for these birds? Do you know that?
Oh, okay, with the peregrine?
Yes.
Okay, the peregrine, as we mentioned, you know, wander or whatever, there's 19 subspecies, but it's all the same species, but there's 19, so they're different locations. And so they were everywhere. And from what I've read about falconry, it actually started in Asia like 3,000 years ago. So what they were getting were the peregrine. And the peregrine's the preferred falcon bird because they can vary in size, and they like the different subspecies. Some might be a little bit smaller than other subspecies, but oh yes, they're all fast, definitely. Yeah, when you're looking in a binocular and all of a sudden, oh, this totally disappears, then you'll know, yes.
When they kill,
Right, they do that same thing. Like, as I mentioned earlier, they normally would not prey upon an eagle or a great horned owl, but to defend their eyrie, they will attack them and kill them. And the way they do it, they would get up in a high dive, come down, and think of that force and something hitting it. Yeah, 2 pounds times da 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 da, do the physics. And it knocks them, and then they would sever it and kill it. But they normally would not prey upon those big birds like that. Yes?
So they're called a duck hawk. A duck is significantly heavier.
Mm-hmm.
Do they, cache their food and just take off strips back to the nest?
Yes, yes. They, I've seen them like at Chimney Rock. They'll take it to their favorite little perch, and they will take the feathers off before they would take it to the young and everything. And they do that before they would eat it also. Yeah.
So they can carry several times their own weight.
Yes. And that's the purpose that they think in the dimorphism in the size of the male and the female, because if they're both hunting a certain area, like the female, because she's larger, could actually prey upon larger prey than the male. And so, if they're both hunting, it's like somebody's going to McDonald's to get something, and another's going to a different place, to get their food in the same territory. Okay, anything else? Okay, we're going to go by caravan, those who would like, to the, it's right at the entrance of Chimney Rock. It's, when you turn to go into Chimney Rock, it's called the Old Rock House Cafe, and it's to the right. It belongs to Chimney Rock. And they're celebrating Earth Day today, and in the back, they're going to have booths set up, and there's a gentleman who Jay and I have known for a long, long time. He used to be a biology teacher in Buncombe County, and then later he was their environmental teacher, science teacher for the whole Buncombe County, and now he's a rehabber, and he has an adult Peregrine Falcon, which I haven't been able to show you today, and he also has the smallest falcon, the little kestrel. And he's going to be there, and there'll be other booths. Also, one of our biologists, she is our amphibian biologist, and she's going to be there, at least I was told. And she's going to have a hellbender. And those who may not know, a hellbender is this really large salamander that's found in some of our pristine streams. So we'll go there, and they have wonderful lunch there at the cafe. They have wonderful sandwiches, and they have their own homemade potato chips that are really good with Parmesan on them. Anyway, so any questions? Yes?
How long is it going to be?
Also, I'm going to set up the spotting scope. I think they're going to be there until 2-ish or 3. You're talking about the other people? Yeah, and it'll take us about 20 minutes probably to get up there, those who would like to follow up there.
Do you need to pay entrance?
No. Because we're not going into the park, we're just going to the cafe, and all of this celebration is behind. Also, I can set up a spotting scope, and if it's not too foggy, I can center it on the eyrie. And for those who won't be joining us, to show you how fragile things are in nature, and also with the recovery of endangered species. So far this spring, the birds aren't doing anything. They have had a helicopter working, they're redoing the Gatto area there, and they're having to bring in supplies to do that. They were supposed to have done it during the winter, and they haven't completed. And I was there Friday, and the helicopter was going up and down. And so if you're, think about somebody outside your window, your bedroom window, you wouldn't want to be mating or copulating or whatever, with a helicopter going up and down. No, you wouldn't. Hey, you're exactly right. I wouldn't want to poop, So anyway, just to let you know, but I can at least show you where the eyrie is and everything. And who knows, we might, with the stream and everything, it's difficult to hear them down there, but who knows? You never know when you go out in nature what you're going to see or whatever. Okay.
Are there kestrels nesting?